Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome back to day 2 of our infection prevention and control and our non-nursing webinar series. Thank you so much for joining us. If you were here yesterday, thank you for coming back. If you're just joining us today for the first day, welcome. My name is Cheryl Garrix-Lloyd, and I have the awesome responsibility of being president of this lovely chapter, and we are going to have a wonderful time. So our moderator this afternoon is our assistant treasurer, Mrs. Sandra Morris, and I'll hand over to her, and then she will guide you through the short activity that we will be having at the beginning, and we have 2 lovely presentations this afternoon. Over to you, Madam Sandra, for the official welcome, and let's get the ball rolling.
Okay, thank you, Cheryl. Let me say a pleasant afternoon to all who have joined. I'm seeing persons that have been on time, and we appreciate that. And we want to welcome you to this, our second webinar. I am quite sure that you will enjoy what is prepared. We will learn, and if we have forgotten some things, it's quite good and quite in order that we are reminded of what we probably learned some long time ago, and we need to keep current. So let's come with an open mind and come prepared to learn. So let me welcome those who are on the Zoom, and also welcome to those who are on YouTube. And I trust that we will be engaged, we will participate, and we will have a wonderful session this afternoon. I'm going to hand back to Cheryl at this time, and then I will come again and introduce our speakers for the afternoon.
All right, thank you very much, Madam Moderator. All right, so it is our little tradition to have a little activity to engage your brain. Yesterday, we had a ding-dong showdown with a quiz. Today, we're going to keep it a little bit simpler. So I want everybody to listen to the instructions carefully. But just one thing before we move on. I'm reminding everybody, because you were told when you click the Zoom link, please join with your full name so that we can have the correct persons here for your CE hours. I have a Grace's iPhone in the meeting. I don't know who Grace is, and Grace is not the only Grace. So I'm going to ask you, Grace, please, to rename yourself properly, and anybody else, please make sure so that we can give an account for you when the certificates need to be prepared. All right. And if you're over on YouTube, please remember also to use your full name or to type your full name in the chat so we have knowledge that you are here joining us. All right. So here we go. It's very short this afternoon, but I want you to listen to the instructions. This is just to jog your little brains. There will be 2 words on the screen that I'm going to show. You will not be able to make any 2 or 3 letter words, and you will have 1 minute to make as many words as you can. So if you need to go and get a piece of paper and pen, or you want to open your note section on your devices, do so quickly, because when the 1 minute starts, the 1 minute will be starting. So I'm asking you, please go right ahead, get your paper, get your pen, and ensure that you are able to write down your words. And then when you are done, it's important to write it, because the person who has gotten the most words will get a prize. However, what we will ask you to do when the 1 minute is up is to put in the chat 10 words or 5 words or 6 words. Do not type the actual words. Just tell us the amount that you found, and then you're gonna have to send us a picture when we contact you, because we want to verify that you did get those words. Everybody on the same page with me? I'm not putting up the words until you're sure. So the instructions are, the words will come on the screen. You are supposed to get your devices open to your note page or get a paper and pencil or pen. You are going to be making as many words as you can from the words that will come up on the screen. You will not be able to make any 2 or 3 letter words. And then when the 1 minute is done, you are going to type in the chat the number of words that you found. Then we will contact you, and you will have to send a picture to verify. and then the person who has the most words will have won the prize. Let me hear it. Open your mics or raise your hands if you're ready to see the screen. Nobody's ready?
Ready to see the screen.
All right, I see some hands, I hear a few voices. All right, so since you're ready, let's go. All right, so I need you to tell me when you're seeing the screen. Everybody's seeing the screen?
Yes.
Wonderful. So I'm gonna set the timer and then I'm giving you 1 single minute, remember. So when I say go, then you go. No 2-letter, no 3-letter. Go, 1 minute is going. All right, 1 minute goes really quickly, you know. All right, so that was the 1 minute, but I'll give you 30 more seconds. 30 seconds so we can get this going. All right, and so time is up and we are gonna stop the sharing. So now, for all the persons who participated, please type in the chat, how many words did you make? Then look out for a message from us so that you will have to send us your picture. We're gonna give you a number to send your picture of the words that you did make and we can verify who had the most. So I'm looking out now in the chat to see persons saying I did 10 words, 12 words, 13 words. While I'm doing that and looking in the chat, I will hand right back over to our moderator, Sandra. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you again, Cheryl. And I'm sure that we are ready to begin. So let me just introduce our first presenter. Our first presenter for this afternoon is Mrs. Deborah Uduyu. She is a public health officer affiliated with the Kingston and St. Andrew Health Department. She completed general nursing studies, midwifery, public health nursing, and a Master of Science in Nursing Education. She has 24 years work experience in nursing and midwifery. In addition, Mrs. Udoud served as a public health nurse at the Winwood Road Health Center, Kingston Public Hospital, Victoria Jubilee Hospital, and currently works at the Norman Manley International. Her hobbies include singing, writing, and gardening. I invite us all at this time to put our emoji hands together and welcome to present to us Mrs. Deborah Udu.
Thank you very much, Sandra, for that introduction. The last day was a task, but trust me, you did well. All right. Pleasant good afternoon to everyone on this platform. I want to say a big thank you to the Omega Kappa chapter for this initiative. It is very much appreciated. It is timely and it is well needed. All right. Thank you very much once again. And a pleasant good afternoon to everybody. This afternoon, I'm going to be doing a presentation on port of entry, the expectations at the point of entry, the stakeholders involved at the port of entry, and what we are to expect when we travel to foreign, or we take a cruise, or use other means to go outside the country, visiting other places on vacation or for whatsoever reason. All right, this is a very interesting topic, and I know it is going to be beneficial to everyone on the platform. What is a port of entry? All right, sorry about that. A port of entry as defined by the International Health Regulation is a passage for international entry or exit of travelers, baggages, cargoes, parcels, containers, conveyances from one place to another. All right, one can't just travel or leave a country into another country without having to do.
I'm sorry, Deborah. Could you just go change it to the slideshow so we can see it a little bigger? Sorry.
All right, sorry about that. Is it okay now?
No, it's still the same, but go ahead. That's all right. We don't want to hold you up.
All right. A place of entry where one may lawfully enter or leave a country. A port of entry can also be said to be a place of international travels, which includes airports, rail crossings, seaports, and even roads. People can easily cross a border if there's proximity between countries, if where they live or where they can easily travel from one country to another is proximal. They can also use roads as a point of entry. We have some port of entry here in Jamaica. The international airport at Port Royal here, which is the Norman Manley International Airport, is a major port of entry, which is not new to Jamaicans on this platform. And persons who have been to Jamaica in time past are aware of the international airport in Port Royal. We also have the Sangsters International Airport in Montego Bay. We have the Ian Fleming International Airport in Ochorios. Other seaports in Jamaica include Black River Seaport in St. Elizabeth, the Kingston Seaport. We all know the Kingston Harbor, those that have cleared their barrels before, those that have shipped something from overseas into Jamaica or even out of Jamaica can testify to the location of the Kingston Harbor. We have the Montego Bay Harbor in St. James, the Ochorios Harbor in St. Anne, the Port Antonio Harbor in Portland. We have the Port Esquivel in St. Catherine and the Port Kesar in St. Elizabeth. All these are port of entries by ship into Jamaica. Who are the agencies involved? Who are the persons, the stakeholders involved at the port of entry? Do we just have a port of entry and persons can just travel from one country to another without following regulations, without going through guidelines, or having to abide by some rules and regulations? Can persons just travel at will or when they wish to at their own convenience? No, there are regulations, and these regulations are enforced by agencies. At the port of entry here in Jamaica, we have immigration officers, and even internationally. And what do the immigration officers do? They ensure that every passenger traveling has a passport. It might interest you to know that persons can just get up or just think of traveling and wish to travel and then get board an aircraft. However, because of the regulations and the guidelines and the rules by the immigration officers, that is somehow restricted. So every passenger needs a passport and must have a passport. In addition, non-citizens must have a visa. If you're going to another country, you must acquire the visa into that country. These are part of the things that the immigration officers check and ensures while at the port of entry, especially at the airport. Also, the travel documents must be complete. Let's assume you are coming into a country to work, or you are coming for vacation, or you are coming on a visit. You need documentations to state that you're going to XYZ place. You're not just coming into the country to roam or to be somewhere at any time, not knowing where you're going, not having a destination or somebody to receive you, even at the airport. For persons who are coming to work or stay longer than the stipulated time by immigration, they need work permits. You can't just go into another person's country to start working or to gain employment without a work permit. So all these documents are checked at the airport before a passenger is allowed entry. For citizens, it is a little bit different. Every citizen needs a passport. However, the visa, travel documents, and work permit might not be a requirement at the port of entry for persons who are citizens. Remember, you're coming back to your country or you're going into your country. So you don't need much travel document. You don't need a visa. It is your country. Jamaicans will say it is your yard. All right. And then for the custom agencies, for the custom officers, they check luggages. Persons travel with illegal documents, with illegal equipment, and things that can be of harm to others and even to the country or environment. So they check the baggage, they check the luggages to be sure that things that are legalized enter the country. They also clear goods. There are some goods that exceed the duty-free allowance. So for such, charges can be made. So if some items or the items imported or brought into the country are within the duty-free allowance, then the passenger is cleared, free to enter with the goods. However, if it exceeds, there can be taxes or allowances assigned before such goods can be cleared. We also have persons from the Department of Agriculture. They ensure that the crops, the livestock, and their products coming into the country are not of harm or do not harbor pests, diseases, or even any other organism that might be of harm to the environment. Because sometimes persons travel with fresh fresh foods, fresh plants, and these plants might not be free from pests. There's no way the agricultural department at the airport would do all those investigations to be sure that these items are okay in order to allow the passengers entry with those items. So sometimes they take the items from the passengers, they discard the items, and on other occasions, they would want to take these items into the lab to be sure they are free of pests and harmful organisms. We also have the public health officers. The public health nurses are stationed at the airport 24 hours. In addition, we have the public health inspectors. They are the ones that grant pratique. Pratique means the aircraft is given a go-ahead to the plane. That means passengers can come off. If there's a sick passenger on board, if passengers are coming from endemic country, or the health officers or officials have to go into the plane first before the passengers come off, then pratique is not granted. Sometimes the crew members do not report passengers being sick on board. So the public health officer would have to go on board and just have a kind of general observation to be sure everybody's looking good. And after passengers the plane, there is a fever scan machine at a strategic place. It is between the finger, which is the lower pier, and the immigration hall. That fever scan machine has a monitoring device. Every passenger's temperature is checked. An officer is placed or stationed at the fever scan machine to point out or bring out passengers with elevated temperature. Once a passenger with elevated temperature reflects on the fever scan machine, it beeps, it makes a sound. So that alerts either the public health nurse or the community health aide stationed at the fever scan machine of a passenger coming in with elevated temperature. This passenger is being taken into the office, a temperature recheck is done, and proper documentation advice is done. If the passenger has been to a country of public health significance, that means countries that we have on the list for yellow fever, for malaria fever, for flu, or other pandemic disease of public health concern, those passengers are being retained while a doctor from the Kingston and St. Andrew Health Department is called to come on board for blood samples. All right, so all this take place at the airport, at the port of entry. You may not see it visibly because you're coming through without an elevated temperature. But for those that have come through with elevated temperature or positive travel history, at one point or the other, the public health official or officer might have had a conversation, an interview, or an interaction with such persons. What is port health? Port health is the aspect of public health, a very important aspect of public health services that ensures the prevention of quarantinable diseases. Remember, the port of entry is where everybody coming into that country utilizes. It can be by ship, it can be by an aircraft, or other means of crossing from one border to another, or through one border to another. All right, persons with communicable diseases are not going to make the noise to say, all right, I have this disease, or I'm coming from a country that is endemic for this or that disease. So it is the responsibility of the port health of each country to ensure that the border is well protected and well secured, because the passengers won't even declare. Some of them won't even tell you that they have any illness. Some have been suffering from flu, and when there was when COVID started, some had symptoms while they were overseas, and they were actually told that they had COVID. But because they knew that if they come here and say anything, they are going to get retained. They are going to delay their time of having to get home, and some other disruptions. So they won't say anything. So it is the responsibility, the obligation of the Ministry of Health of every country to ensure that its port health is very active, well active. All right. The conditions of public health significance might not be easily detected or easily specified, as I said earlier, by the passenger. But with a valid, active port health, some of these illnesses, I'm not saying all, because some can still slip through the crack. Some of these illnesses can be detected and prevented from coming into the country. There was a case of malaria we had some time ago. This passenger came through one of the airlines. And while on board, he knew that he was ill, he had malaria. There was nothing said. Also, while on the plane, he was having symptoms and signs as well because he threw up. He vomited on the aircraft, and nothing was said. So, with a valid port health and with a valid or active public health surveillance officers at the port of entry, some of these illnesses can be prevented from even getting into the country. Because if such a passenger is detected, then he's being conveyed straight from the airport to Kingston Public Hospital or a health facility. And before he leaves the airport, blood samples are going to be taken and sent to the lab for ongoing investigation. Why port health? Why is it important? Why do we need to ensure an active and an ongoing port health? Port health helps to determine the health screening of each passenger passing through the airport or the port of entry, and also prevent movement of communicable diseases or illnesses of public health significance across countries. How does an illness that starts in a country, in one country, end up being a pandemic? It is because persons leave that same country where the illness originates or the disease originates, and they travel somewhere else with the disease, transferring that illness across borders, across countries. How did COVID-19 become a pandemic? It started from one country, but persons from that country traveled to other countries all over the world, and before we know it, it became a pandemic. And other communicable diseases like Ebola, malaria, yellow fever, flu, other diseases, SARS, MERS, have been transported across borders by human beings. These illnesses cannot travel on their own. They travel through vectors. They travel through carriers. So with a good, active, valid port health, then some of these illnesses can be contained, and we can ensure and be sure of having less pandemics. The objectives of port health is to reduce international spread of communicable diseases. It is also to conduct exit screening during outbreaks, like during COVID-19 pandemic. Persons who were COVID-19 positive were not allowed to travel. Signals, notifications were sent to immigration and other stakeholders on the airport, even the airlines. So once they arrive at the airport and their names appear on the systems, the stakeholders call us, the public health officers. So we take out those passengers, advise them, and then pass on the information. The passengers are not allowed to travel. Sometimes the Ministry of Health ban will come here to the airport, convey the passengers to the place of quarantine. So port health ensures proper exit screening so that illnesses are not conveyed from country of exit to the country of entry. It also helps to conduct entry screening. It is a requirement for every arriving passenger during COVID-19 pandemic to do a COVID test. Even at present that COVID-19 is no longer a pandemic, every passenger arriving from countries endemic for yellow fever are expected to get vaccinated. If they are not vaccinated, a line listing is done to ensure a follow-up in case of possible signs or symptoms. And persons arriving from countries on the list for malaria fever are advised to take anti-malaria prophylaxis. We ask them at the airport, did you take your prophylaxis before leaving here and while in the country of visit? If the answer is no, we have to do a line listing, do a proper in-depth interview, check body temperature, and send that information to the Ministry of Health for follow-up. And we also check out countries that have epidemics like flu. And sometimes ago, we heard in the news that there are 9 cases of malaria in a nearby country. So we had to be on the lookout for persons arriving from that country in case any of them present with a sign or symptom. If a passenger presents with a symptom at the airport and there's no positive travel history, if it is a low-grade fever and flu-like symptoms, the passenger is advised and sent home, and sometimes we take information for follow-up. However, on the contrary, if the passenger is arriving from a country of public health significance, let's say countries on the list for yellow fever, malaria fever, Ebola, or other epidemics, then measles, then we must do a proper line listing and also inform the doctor on duty. Most times at the airport, if a passenger is arriving from a country of public health concern or a country on the list for an endemic illness, epidemic illness, we have to take the blood, or we call the doctor on duty at the Kingston and St. Andrews Health Department to take blood samples from here while the passenger is sent home on advice. For some passengers, we say remain at home for the incubation period of this disease. If you have further symptoms or if you have any symptom at all, go to a nearby clinic or hospital and tell them your travel history. And for others with, no symptom, we say, all right, after the incubation period, you are allowed to go about your business. There are stages of public health screening at the airport. It is a systematic, we use a systematic approach, all right, for screening at the airport. The primary screening done involves observation. Usually, public health nurses on duty stay at the finger, the lower pier, that is the passage from the long passage where, after you come off the aircraft, there's a long passage. After that passage, it is a lower pier. The lower pier connects the passage from the aircraft to the immigration hall. For persons who have traveled through the Norman Manley International Airport, you can just walk your imagination through what I'm describing right now so you can have a better picture. So a public health nurse at the finger does health education and also observation while she's talking with the passengers, interacting with the passengers on whatsoever health issues that we're trying to make the passengers aware of. She's also observing the passengers. There's another health officer by the fever scan machine. She's also doing observation. All those are part of primary observations. And for obvious signs of illnesses, for obvious symptoms, passengers are retrieved for further, or let me say interview, not further interview, for interview, all right? We also measure temperature, as I said earlier, and we take information, especially the history, travel history from passengers. The secondary screening include healthcare officials conducting extra assessments of potentially ill or ill passengers. Potentially ill passengers are those passengers arriving from endemic countries. They might have the viruses or the parasites in their systems and are not yet exhibiting symptoms. It might be a period of incubation, so they are potentially exposed and they can have symptoms. They may or may not have symptoms. So for these passengers, we do a more in-depth assessment, we do interviews, and also we take information. Public health screening provides an excellent opportunity for countries to educate travelers on the signs and symptoms of illnesses and the illnesses available in the population they are coming into. For example, at present, dengue fever is endemic here. Presently at the Norman International Airport, there's an ongoing health awareness, health education for every shift, explaining to passengers that yes, we have dengue fever out here at present. These are the signs and symptoms. It is a mosquito-borne disease. Please protect yourself. It might not be an in-depth health education because passengers are in transit. Some of them are not patient enough to wait and listen to what we have to say. And some are coming from a very long journey, so we can't hold them too long. And also immigration have their work to do. They don't want us to hold the passengers for too long. So we just have to be strategic and also be wise with the health education. However, we still get the information out there to the passengers for them to be aware of what is obtainable in the population at present and how to protect themselves. Health organization may recommend enhanced screening measures, especially when there is something of public health significance or concern, as it was during COVID. During COVID, the Norman Manley International Airport became like a hospital. The doctors, so many doctors, so many nurses and other health officials from Kingston Public Hospital, Victoria Jubilee Hospital, from health centers and other places were retrieved and brought here to assist with the workload, because it was a one-to-one interview, one-on-one interview with the passengers. We don't see the passengers in group. It has to be one passenger to one health official. So it was so taxing, it was so burdensome. Then we needed more hands. So resources, human resources were pulled from all over to ensure that the best was done where port health is concerned during COVID. And that happens whenever we have a pandemic or any issue of public health significance. I am using the Norman Manley International Airport because that is where I work. So I have a full picture of the port health activities that goes on here. However, we still have other port of entries. Like I said earlier, we have the railways, we have the shipping docks, the borders, and then we have areas where the cargoes arrive. So we have other stakeholders working in such areas. For the cargoes, we don't have a public health nurse. We have a public health inspector since they have to grant pratique. Public health screening at the airport include the processing of commercial flights. Every commercial flight is being processed. Some of the processing techniques or strategies or methods have been explained earlier. Because of our time, I'm not going to go back into those. However, for the private flight, I've not said anything on that I didn't say anything on that previously. For the private flights and also for air ambulances, we have special way of handling those. Private flights are chartered flights or flights by businessmen, people who could afford to be in an aircraft all by themselves or just one family in an aircraft. All right, for those flights, we still have to manually go to the other side of the airport to check their temperature. They don't arrive at the section where the commercial flights arrive. They have a separate section called general aviation. So we have to go there once the flight is about to land. The agents call us and tell us a flight is arriving from this country, that country, and it's coming with 5 passengers, 2 passengers, depending on the number of passengers. And also, they give us information on the country the flight is arriving from. However, they do not have in-depth information of the countries visited by the occupants of the aircraft within the last 6 weeks. So we still have to go around general aviation, interview the passengers. Where have you traveled within the last 6 weeks? 6 weeks is used because the incubation period for most of the illnesses, for most of the diseases, fall within 6 weeks, within 40 days. Malaria has an incubation period of about 40 days, 40 to 42 days. Yellow fever has an incubation period of about 3 to 6 days. So most of the incubation periods fall within 6 weeks. If they have traveled to any endemic country within 6 weeks, even if they are arriving from a non-endemic country, we still process them. All right, we take their information, as I've stated earlier, and treat them like they are coming from an endemic country. Interviews and advice is very, very important. Health education is very important because sometimes the passengers wonder, why did you take me out of all these passengers? Why me? So we have to do ongoing health education, in-depth health education for them to understand that this is why we took you out, and this is why we are going through this process with you, and this is expected of you, that is expected of you. That makes them to give more cooperation. For passengers arriving on air ambulances, these are passengers, patients from other countries that have been accepted by the University Hospital of the West Indies, Kingston Public Hospital, or other private clinics, hospitals, or facilities. They arrive by aircraft and have to be seen by the agent and public health officials. Some days ago, I think last week, a passenger came with tuberculosis, and we were not aware because the agents do not have that information, and they are not public health officers, so they do not even know which question to ask. We had to go there, ask the passenger, if he had started anti-cox medication. He said yes, so that was a plus on his part, and also on the part of the team. And that also gave us information which we passed on to the Kingston and St. Andrew Health Department for follow-up surveillance, for surveillance. They had to go to the passenger or the patient at the University Hospital of the West Indies for ongoing, for continuation in the surveillance process that was started at the airport. So for air ambulances and the private flight, we still have to see them same way. We have history taking for passengers arriving on commercial flights. We have health education. I said that earlier. The monitoring of the fever scan machine. We have flights from endemic countries. For flights from endemic countries, all the passengers have to see the public health nurses and community health aides first before going to immigration. If they pass the public health nurses and public health officers to immigration, they are usually sent back if immigration detects that they have not been seen, interviewed, or advised by the health team. And referrals are also made by immigration. There are some countries that immigration have on their list based on international health regulations that must have specific vaccinations like oral polio, measles, DPT. They must have these vaccines before they can be landed. If they do not have these vaccines, they are taken into immigration secondary and they have a separate process for them. And there are visa waivers for some countries if their passengers have these prerequisite vaccinations. So immigration will still call the public health nurses and say, nurse, please can you vet this vaccination card? If all the vaccines are complete and if they are up to date, so they still make referrals to us. We have to now tell them that yes, the vaccinations are up to date, the passengers can be landed. We have sick passengers on board. For sick passengers on board, all the passengers on the aircraft are not allowed to disembark, not until the public health team arrives. So we then give instruction on either to let the sick person out first or to let the sick person out last, depending on the symptoms the person is exhibiting, the passenger is exhibiting. I spoke about processing for private flights already, so I'm going to be moving right along. For vaccination records, persons arriving from country endemic for yellow fever must present the evidence of vaccination. Otherwise, a line listing is done and they are processed. We also have programs for staff and stakeholders at the airport. The vaccination week in the Americas is going to be coming up in April. So there's an existing plan to get stakeholders here at the airport vaccinated, because persons are working here, and if they are not adequately vaccinated, they are exposed to some viruses and some parasites that they may not even know about. But if they are well vaccinated, there's that protection and the fortification of the immune system. For the Cancer Awareness Month, there's also a program in place, and plans are ongoing at present to do some pap smears for passengers. No, sorry, not passengers, stakeholders at the airport. We have the call out cascade. The call out cascade has to do with the hierarchy or the order of, passing information from the public health nurse to the Minister of Health. It starts with the public health nurse. She picks up the phone. If there's anything of public health significance, calls the doctor on duty at the Kingston and St. Andrew Health Department, who comes to the airport to take blood samples if need be. And if it is anything to be reported, the information is passed on and on. So there's a call out cascade. And if the doctor on duty cannot be reached for one legitimate reason or the other, then we can call the next person on the hierarchy or on the list. Then response during a pandemic, I said a few things about that earlier when I was making reference to COVID-19 pandemic. And the response during a pandemic is spontaneous. It is something that of urgency, that material resources, human resources, and all forms of resources needed have to be put together to curtail the pandemic. What are the limitations to public health screening at the port of entry? Travelers who are infected may not say anything about their illness because they don't want any long protocol. They just want to pass through immigration, customs, and then to their place of destination. And transmission from pre-symptomatic or asymptomatic passengers may have infected or affected persons on board before the plane even gets to its place of destination. If somebody is traveling with Ebola, somebody is traveling with Ebola viruses or COVID-19 viruses and not putting the adequate preventive measures, not putting adequate preventive measures in place, so much or so many persons on board would have been infected before the plane arrives its destination. Remember, some flights take 9 hours. If you're traveling from England, you're 9 hours in the plane. And if you're coming from JFK, about 4 hours. If you're coming from Toronto, about 4 to 6 hours, depending on where you're traveling from. So all this time of coming in contact with viruses, parasites, and other germs would ensure the establishment of a disease or of an illness, if not for everybody on the aircraft. Obtaining reliable temperature readings is affected by multiple factors. The airport here is usually very, very cold, sometimes extremely cold. So once the fever scan machine picks up a passenger and you transport that passenger from the point of the fever scan machine to the office, to the quarantine unit, the cooling system or the temperature of the airport itself would have produced a cooling effect on that passenger. By the time you check it back, it is normal. And this was a passenger with a very high temperature just a few minutes ago. So the temperature of the airport can influence the reading that we get from the fever scan machine, and also when we do the temperatures manually. Also, thermal scanners require increased space. And also the power supply has to be consistent. Sometimes we have power outage here at the airport. I know they have a solar system in place, but before it switches over or before the conversion takes place, it takes seconds, or even it can take up to a minute or more. So when that happens now, there's a disruption in the usual or normal functioning of the fever scan machine. It is a very expensive machine. We have just one at the airport, and if there's any malfunctioning, we do not have a replacement or something else to use in the interim. Sometimes it malfunctions or it has technical issues. So for that period of time, all the passengers passing through with elevated temperature are going to get away. So many factors must come into play or have to be put in place for the fever scan machine to do what it is expected to do. To avoid disruptions to the travels of passengers, people might not reveal information, vital information that might be of interest to Port Health. Sometimes ask a passenger, sir, have you been anywhere else within the last 6 weeks? No, I'm coming from the US and I've been in the US for the last 3 months or for the last 1 year. You know, they tell you what you want to hear. They don't want to tell you what is going to implicate them, even if or even though they know that there's something they should disclose when it comes to their health issues. What are the key information that we, the health officials, should share with travelers before traveling, during traveling, and after traveling? One, we must educate passengers on measures to remain healthy and free from risk. Here at my place of work, we do not have that system in place yet to educate outgoing passengers of measures to take while going to an endemic country because we don't have the manpower. However, we are stationed at the arrival suite. When persons are returning, we try to ask where they are coming from in order to see if we can curtail the entry of illnesses or pests, parasites into the country. So it should be a two-way thing. Passengers should be well educated before traveling and after traveling. It is not just after traveling. So I pray one day we are going to get there when we have enough manpower to be able to ensure that both outgoing and incoming passengers are well educated. Screening that are in place at the point of entry should be communicated with passengers before they even travel. Sometimes when passengers arrive from an endemic country, especially those endemic for yellow fever, they complain, why are you just doing this? Why didn't you tell us before traveling? We have some of this information on the Ministry of Health website, but how many passengers are going to take or make that extra effort to go on the website to check for endemic countries? They are more interested in the cheapest plane fare and other things rather than their health issues. So it is still our responsibility to educate them on what to expect where screening is concerned on arrival. We are also to educate them on the availability of healthcare services at their destination. I am saying that we are to do that because we don't have a system in place that is doing all this at present. Then on arrival, passengers are going to be educated on how to protect themselves from any illness of concern while arriving the country. As I said earlier, we have dengue fever presently in our population. So our persons coming back, those coming on vacation, tourists are to be educated on how to protect themselves from dengue fever. They are also to be informed on how to self-monitor for signs and symptoms of illnesses. Endemic illnesses, epidemic illnesses, and pandemic illnesses are very significant to Port Health. Endemic illnesses are those that are consistently or constantly in the population. epidemics are illnesses that are in the population, but becomes unexpectedly high or exhibit unexpected increase in number. Like, I'm still going to use dengue fever because that is what is endemic at present. It has been in the population all the while. We always have dengue fever in our population. It is endemic to Jamaica. However, we are having an outbreak at present. So that outbreak makes it an epidemic. We are having unexpected increase in the number of cases seen in the hospitals and other facilities. Pandemic illnesses are those affecting several countries, like the COVID-19 pandemic. And we had other pandemics in the past, like the SARS, the MERS, Ebola. All right, they are also pandemic examples of pandemic illnesses. These are some of the countries endemic to malaria fever. Some are in the Caribbean, others in Africa, others in Latin America. And some of these, some countries may not be on this list. However, they can have significant cases of malaria that might be of interest to us. Like I was saying earlier, we heard in the news that the US had about 9 cases of malaria. That is not the norm. All right, so we have to be looking out for persons arriving from flights from the USA in case any is exhibiting possible sign or symptom of malaria. The list here is for countries endemic for yellow fever. Passengers from endemic countries are being processed on a daily basis. They are being interviewed. They are being advised. Vaccination records are required. Malaria prophylaxis required from those arriving from malarious countries. Line listing is done, completed, and sent off on a Google document to the Ministry of Health. Referrals are made. And also we have the isolation unit here for persons who are exhibiting exaggerated symptoms or symptoms of significance and cannot just be let out into the population or into the country. So we put them in the isolation unit before the ambulance arrives to convey them to the hospital or facility of quarantine. The isolation unit is equipped. It is still a working process, but as it is now, it is equipped and it is being used. The vaccinations or prophylaxis that are significant to port health include yellow fever, flu vaccines, malaria prophylaxis, and COVID-19 vaccines for air ambulances. For other passengers, COVID-19 vaccination is not mandatory, but for air ambulances, we still encourage them to do a COVID-19 test so as to exclude the illness. What are some of the foods allowed into Jamaica and why? Why is there restriction on the food? All right, restrictions are on the food items imported into the country because some of the animal and plant products can harbor pests or germs that can be of hazardous influence to our environment. Some of the foods allowed include saltfish, herring, mackerel, cooked fish, canned fish, salt fish, and some other items are listed there. And remember, if any of these items are to be imported or brought in, there should be a declaration. It shouldn't be something you are hiding in your bag or hiding somewhere in your luggage. You don't want the immigration officers to see it. There is an online immigration form or the C5 form, and it makes a provision for you to make declaration of whatsoever thing you're carrying. Once you declare it, it becomes easier for the custom officers to ask simple questions and let you through. But when it is not declared and they have to search your bag to dig out these things, it might create some kind of suspicion that maybe you have other stuff in there apart from the stipulated or the stated item. And other foods allowed are listed here because of my time. I am just going to go to the next slide. Foods prohibited include honey and its products, pork and its products, beef and beef products, lobster and other live products. And if you're coming in with an animal, you're supposed to get either a dog or a cat. You're supposed to get a permit from your country of origin to state that you're traveling with an animal, and also you have your documentations intact. If it is a urn you're traveling with, or you're traveling with a body, you're also supposed to get documentation done. If it is a body one is traveling with, there should be a collaboration with the funeral home, and that should be done before you even embark on your journey, on your travel. You get the documentation sorted with them. The funeral home will be here with their van to convey the body straight from the airport to the home. So once all these processes are followed and the guidelines are adhered to, immigration, custom processes or processing becomes easy. And port health also becomes easy. All right. Thank you very much for listening. Hope I have not exceeded my time. Any question? Or Madam President, are you leaving the questioning for later?
Thank you so much, Madam Deborah. Our moderator had a small challenge. I know she just came back in, so I'm not sure if she's hearing us yet, but I will ask persons to, yes, please just make a note of their questions. I have a couple, but thank you for a comprehensive presentation. I think we join the line when we travel, a lot of us, and we get maybe ask a couple questions or we don't, but I don't think we realize the magnitude of what's happening in terms of port health. So thank you once again. So just make a note of your questions. Don't lose them. We will have them after our next presentation. So we have for our second presentation, a little conversation about climate change and infectious diseases. I'm not sure who was listening, but I was very distressed last year, I would say, in the heat. And there was a person from our Jamaica Environmental Trust talking, and she said that is going to be one of the coolest summers we have in the years to come. And I said, coolest? It is so hot. But apart from the heat, we need to find out what else is happening in terms of infection prevention and control and how we're going to use that. So our next presenter is Miss Lorianne Harris. And Lorianne is an environmental management practitioner. She has a passion for balancing conservation and holistic development, and she complements her love of exploring the outdoors and Jamaica's rich natural resources. She's the environmental coordinator with the Natural Resources Management and the Environmental Planning Department of the Urban Development Corporation here in Jamaica. She also serves as the Vice President of the Jamaica Institute of Environment Professionals Council, and she's also President of the Natural History Society of Jamaica. We thank Lorianne for joining us. Over to you, Madam Lorianne.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much, Cheryl. Thank you for having me. I'm really looking forward to this presentation. I hope you can forgive me. I'm having some amount of challenges because the electricity went, so I'm trying to do some damage control in order to give this presentation. So please just bear with me a moment. As soon as you're able to see my screen, please let me know.
We appreciate your efforts, and the screen is now visible.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. Okay, so the topic is climate change and infectious diseases. So on the first slide, I actually found this graphic that looks at One Health, where human health and animal health and environmental health are actually all connected in terms of how we see health in a holistic sense on this planet that we call Earth. I thought it was a really good graphic. And I'm going to ask, I want this session to be a little interactive. So when we think of climate change, can anybody tell me what are some of the things that come to mind? I have some of the things here on the slide, but is there anything else that tends to come to mind when you hear climate change? Anyone? Or are these the typical things that you think of? Warmer temperatures, intense droughts, melting ice caps, declining biodiversity. When environmentalists or environmental management practitioners speak, these are normally the things we speak about. Have you heard any other thing touted about when it comes to climate change?
You might not see my hand. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
The ozone layer.
The ozone layer, okay, wonderful, right? Anything else?
Food shortage.
Food shortage, great. That is an excellent answer. Thank you very much for that. Anything else?
Deforestation.
Deforestation, yes. So these are actually some of the other things that are not necessarily mentioned initially when people start to speak about climate change. So thank you for that. So many people think that climate change mainly means warmer temperatures, but temperature rise is only the beginning of the story. Because the Earth is a system where everything is connected, changes in one area can influence changes in all the other areas. And so we recognize that the consequences of climate change now include, among other things, intense droughts, water scarcity. You have severe fires, rising sea levels, flooding, melting polar ice, catastrophic storms, and declining biodiversity. However, nothing to do with human health. That's actually not true. A statement from the WHO says, healthy societies rely on well-functioning ecosystems to provide clean air, fresh water, medicines, and food security. These help to limit disease and stabilize the climate. But biodiversity loss is happening at an unprecedented rate, impacting human health worldwide and increasing the risk of emerging infectious diseases. In fact, over half of known human pathogenic diseases are exacerbated by climate change, particularly diseases that originate in animals and vector-borne diseases. And they think that zoonotic diseases account for 3 out of every 4 newly emerging pathogens, including the recent pandemic, COVID-19. So changes in climate alter the distribution, diversity, and abundance of vectors and non-human hosts, as well as the host susceptibility to pathogens and pathogen replication. It's also thought that climate changes can also speed the transmission of pathogens and promote the establishment of new diseases. So when you put this together with global travel networks and dense urbanization, new pathogens can rapidly spread to areas far from their origins. This is a statement I want us to remember. Climate change is the single biggest health threat facing humanity today. Why is this true? It is threatening all aspects of human society, including risks to human health. Climate change is harming physical, mental, spiritual, and community health through the increasing frequency and intensity of extreme events, higher incidences of infectious and vector-borne diseases, and declines in food and water security. These impacts worsen social inequities. Emission reductions, effective adaptation measures, and climate-resilient health systems can protect human health and improve health equity. All right, so climate change. What is climate change? Climate change refers to long-term shifts in temperatures and weather patterns. That's a simple way to look at it. It is loosely defined as the average weather at a particular place, incorporating things like temperature, precipitation, humidity, and windiness. Climate change can be natural, for example, due to changes in the sun's activity or large volcanic eruptions. But since the 1800s, human activities, and we call this the industrial era, human activities have been the main driver of climate change, primarily due to the burning of fossil fuels like coal, oil, and gas. So periodic modification of Earth's climate brought about as a result of changes in the atmosphere, as well as interactions between the atmosphere and various other geological, chemical, biological, and geographic factors within the Earth system. So remember when I started, I did mention that the Earth is a system. And so one thing affects the other. An easy way to remember, when we talk about weather, we talk about short-term changes in atmospheric conditions. When we talk about climate, we're talking about long-term patterns. Here's a quick graphic that looks at the impact of climate change on human health. And we can see where, for instance, air pollution can result in incidences of asthma, cardiovascular diseases, vector-borne diseases such as malaria, dengue, encephalitis, hantavirus, Rift Valley fever. We have issues with mental health, anxiety, despair, depression, post-traumatic stress. I'm sure that in your areas, you may have seen increases in several of these kinds of diseases. And climate change can, in fact, affect all of these. When we talk about climate change and health risk, climate-related hazards, you have extreme weather events, heat, sea level rise, air pollution, vector distribution and ecology, water scarcity, reduced food production, vulnerability factors, demographic, geographical, biological factors and health status, socio-political factors, socio-economic factors, health system capacity, gender and equity, and of course, exposure of people and communities, health workforce, infrastructure, energy systems, water systems, food systems, and health systems. Climate-sensitive health risks are disproportionately felt by the most vulnerable and disadvantaged, including women, children, ethnic minorities, poor communities, migrants or displaced persons, older populations, and those with underlying health conditions. So let's look at infectious diseases in particular. Very loosely, these are disorders caused by organisms such as bacteria, viruses, fungi, or parasites. And these are typically spread from person to person, insects or other animals, consuming contaminated food or water, or being exposed to organisms in the environment itself. Climate change is expected to alter the distribution, abundance, and seasonality of pathogens and their associated infections. So some climate-sensitive infectious diseases are expected to see expanded geographic range and extended seasonality. So we're expecting to find these infectious diseases in places they weren't really known before, and we're expecting them even in places they were found before to last longer. In an article I found, researchers posited that climate change can exacerbate a full 58% of the infectious diseases that humans come in contact with worldwide, from common waterborne viruses to deadly viruses like plague. And they reviewed over 77,000 scientific papers, and of those, 830 papers had a climatic hazard affecting a specific disease in an explicit place and or time, allowing them to create a database of climatic hazards and transmission pathways, pathogens, and diseases. So people are actually actively studying how climate change and climatic hazards are in fact driving the incidences of diseases. Here's another graphic I found. This is in the US, and it shows regional examples of climate-sensitive infectious diseases. So you're looking at the disease vectors and hosts and environmental pathogens, and you can see the spread across the United States. So let's look at climate and pathogen risk. How are the things related? Well, climate-related hazards can bring pathogens closer to people through the movement of vectors. So this movement of animals into new areas increases opportunities for contact between humans and animals and the potential spread of zoonotic diseases. For example, climate-related hazards are shifting the ranges of animals and organisms that act as vectors for dangerous pathogenic diseases. It is actually forcing some animal species into new habitats as their natural habitats disappear. And it is also expanding the habitats of other animals. Now we can understand, because as the environment changes, there are some animals that are not doing so well where they were before because their entire habitat has disappeared. So they're going to look for new homes. Maybe there's a community or a population nearby that had never actually encountered them because these animals had no reason to venture outside of their habitat. Now they do, they're forced to, and they take with them these vectors, right? These pathogens. All right. Another climate and pathogen risk is climate-related hazards can actually alter behaviors, now bringing people in closer contact with the pathogen. So climate change can affect how we as human beings behave. During heat waves, people often spend more time in water, which can lead to increase in waterborne disease outbreaks. It can force people into hazardous conditions, such as when disaster damage leads to people living in crowded conditions that might lack good sanitation or increase their exposure to pathogens. Climate-related hazards can also weaken the body's ability to cope with pathogens. So hazards can reduce the body's capacity to fight off pathogens through malnutrition, for example. Living through climatic hazards may also induce increased cortisol production from stress, leading to a reduction in the human body's immune response. So climate-related hazards can affect the human body's ability to cope with pathogens in general. Climate-related hazards can also enhance pathogens. Now, this is really very important. In some cases, climate-related hazards have led to either environmental conditions that can increase opportunities for pathogens to interact with vectors or increase the ability of pathogens to cause severe illness in humans. So, for example, standing water left by heavy precipitation and flooding, you end up with increased mosquito breeding sites, which increases the transmission of diseases. For instance, the 2016 resurgence of the Zika virus. Rising temperatures may also help viruses become more resistant to heat. So it is an adaptation. And if you understand natural selection, those organisms that are able to weather a particular stress or hardship will continue to persist in the environment. So the longer they're exposed to it, those that don't die continue to persist and they are okay with these higher temperatures. Rising global temperatures are leading to increased heat tolerance of fungal pathogens, right? And these are actually really important because if you think about even fungal pathogens and mold, things like that, these are things that you can actually encounter within your home because we have the AC or we have a refrigerator that's leaking. We have spaces that are a little bit cold and damp. Fungus and mold start to grow in those spaces. So studies have shown that rising temperatures may also help viruses become more resistant to heat, resulting in increased disease severity as pathogens become better able to adapt to fever in the human body. Now that is interesting because normally you have a fever, your body is fighting off the infection, and the increased temperature actually is supposed to also help your body to get rid of certain things. Now, if you have a pathogen that is now able to survive in higher temperatures, raising your body temperature is probably not going to cut it. So yes, your immune system is kicking, but that additional help that you would have from just an increase in temperature isn't going to cut it for things that it used to help with. Some studies have suggested that rising global temperatures are leading to increased heat tolerance of fungal pathogens, as I mentioned before. And it has actually allowed certain disease-causing fungi to spread into new areas that previously were too cold for them to survive. So even though you have warming, you also have areas that are now colder than they used to be. So you have to contend with either increases in temperatures or reduction in temperatures in places that were warmer as well. Now, as the difference between environmental temperatures and human body temperatures also narrows, new fungal diseases may emerge as fungi become more adapted to actually now surviving in humans. Other vital concerns. Now, water is really, what NWC says water is life, and that is true. 783 million people do not have access to clean water. 2.4 billion people worldwide lack proper sanitation. 1,000 children die every day due to preventable water and sanitation-related diarrheal diseases, and 1.8 billion people globally use a source of drinking water that is fecally contaminated. Water is at the core of sustainable development and is critical for socioeconomic development, energy and food production, healthy ecosystems, and for human survival itself. Water is also at the heart of adaptation to climate change, serving as a crucial link between society and the environment. So we're going to look at food and water security. Climate change negatively impacts water quality, water security, food security, and nutrition, which harms health, particularly for communities that rely on agriculture, fishing, and subsistence lifestyles. But it can also directly impact on the incidences of food and waterborne diseases. The incidences of these diseases is expected to increase due to climate conditions that promote bacterial growth and geographic spread. An example, vibriosis is a disease caused by ingesting vibrio bacteria in contaminated shellfish or water sources. Symptoms can range from food poisoning-like illness to death. Increased flooding will damage infrastructure, degrade catchments, and contaminate water supplies. Flooding can also lead to overflowing pit latrines, tanks, and sewers, and bypassing of wastewater treatment works. Floods bring polluted runoff from agricultural lands, cities, and industries. These can then enter community catchments. Droughts will reduce water availability and degrade source water quality. Increasing temperatures will change consumption requirements to maintain a healthy hydration and may adversely affect wastewater treatment processes and damage infrastructure in melting permafrost regions. Retreat of glaciers will contribute to water scarcity. Wildfires will degrade catchments and water quality. Sea level rise and storm surges caused by windstorms will increase threats of salinization of water resources. So these things that are brought about by climate change will have direct impact on our food and water security. And once your water supply is affected and your food security is threatened, you are going to have increased incidences of infectious diseases. So what can we do? Where do we go from here? Well, we think that collaboration is critical in so many other areas of life. It is also critical here. We need collaboration among experts from various sectors. We need research towards better understanding of the interconnected nature of public health with economic, geographical, social, demographic, and environmental drivers of infectious diseases. The WHO says that we need to build better, more climate resilient and environmentally sustainable health systems. And we need to protect health from the wide range of impacts of climate change. We can ensure core services, environmental sustainability, and climate resilience are central components of universal healthcare and primary healthcare. We can support health systems towards cheaper, more reliable, and cleaner solutions. Mainstream climate resilience and environmental sustainability into health service investments, including the capacity of the health workforce. Assess health vulnerabilities and develop health plans. Integrate climate risk and implement climate-informed surveillance and response systems for key risks, such as extreme heat and infectious diseases. Support resilience and adaptation in health-determining sectors, such as water and food. And of course, close the financing gap for health adaptation and resilience. And I'll leave you with this. This is the graphic for the Sustainable Development Goals. Health systems are the main line of defense for populations faced with emerging health threats, including from climate change. To protect health and avoid widening health inequities, countries must build climate resilient health systems. Thank you very much. Any questions?
Thank you so much, Madam Lori. Thank you so very much. Colleagues, we've had two very interesting presentations. So I know I'd ask you to hold your questions. So now I'm going to ask you to type your questions in the chat over on YouTube or here on Zoom, and we'll ask you to also raise your hand so we can go ahead with identifying you and you are able to ask your questions for either of our presenters as we get into the Q&A section. All right, so who's going to start with the questions? I don't want to start, but I have a few. All right, I'm not seeing the hands yet. You're thinking about it? I'm waiting on our moderator to come back. So let me hear your questions.
Yes, I'm here, Cheryl, just trying to get back my video.
All right, wonderful. So I'm going to be going over to YouTube just to check if there are questions to put back over here while our colleagues over here ask their questions, and then I'll come back to ask mine. All right, so maybe I can squeeze some privilege. I would want to ask of Deborah. I'm trying to remember. I had two questions for you before I get to Lorian. Why do we need vaccines? We've been asked. Why do we need vaccines for diseases that we don't have in Jamaica when we are traveling? Is one, and I wanted you to remind us if you had a list of the stages of the screening that occurs for the border control.
All right, thank you very much, Madam President. If we don't have a particular disease in Jamaica, then we don't have any vaccine in our regular schedule against that illness. For example, yellow fever is not one of the regular vaccinations done here, since Jamaica is not endemic for yellow fever. However, if you travel to a country with yellow fever, you're exposed. It is a mosquito-borne disease, and there's a tendency that you get bitten by a mosquito on the aircraft, at your hotel room, while on the street, or anywhere in the other country. So if you are exposed and you get the virus, the yellow fever virus, there's a tendency that you can be ill. You can be infected with yellow fever, not just containing that illness, you can also bring it back home. You understand, into the population here. An endemic illness starts from one infected person. So we need yellow fever vaccine or other vaccines, even if we don't have that illness in our population, to protect us when we go to an endemic country. I'm not sure if that answers the question.
Yes, it does. It's something we get asked, I would say, especially when you look at the list of places you want to visit and what vaccines you need. So it's a good way for us to be able to share. That's why we need it, so that we do not bring something back, if I'm understanding you correctly. And then the other question was about the stages of screening. I think you had a list. I may have missed that. If you could share that with us quickly again. You're muted. You're muted, Deborah. All right. Well, I see your computer is not being as cooperative. Well, you figure it out in just a sec. Lori, I had a question for you. I thought you said something about a vibriosis. I'm just making sure I didn't get it incorrect, what that is. And the last statement you had said, we need a climate resilient health system. Would you be able to give us an example of what that can look like here in Jamaica?
Okay, yes, thank you very much for that. Okay, so vibriosis is a bacterial infection.
We're hardly hearing you, Lori.
Are you hearing me better now?
It sounds very low. That's what's happening.
Or I'm not sure what happened. Um,
Sounds better.
Sounds better now.
Yes.
Okay, all right. So vibriosis is actually a bacterial infection, and it usually happens when you eat raw or undercooked shellfish that has been infected with the bacteria. So you end up with, of course, intestinal issues, and that's why eventually it can lead to death if not treated properly, or if the person has a compromised immune system.
All right.
What was the other?
What is an example, if you're able to tell us, of a climate resistant health system in Jamaica?
Okay, so climate resilience really looks at putting systems in place that, for all the build out of how the system operates, it takes into account the possibility of the impacts of climate change. So whenever you're drafting your policies and you're looking at, okay, how are your community health clinics supposed to operate? How are your hospitals supposed to operate? How do you do screening? What are the types of things you screen for? You take into account that people are actually having climate susceptible diseases. So I think one of the things that I had mentioned is, for instance, when you're doing your screening and monitoring, do you acknowledge that, okay, you know what? Right now We don't have the typical wet and dry season at the usual times of year. Do we then need to do an assessment of when we are having more mosquito-borne diseases? When are the mosquitoes breeding? Do we need to go out and start doing fogging sooner? Or do we need to change the times that we do fogging? Do we need to do it for a longer period of time? Which communities do we need to go into? So you need to monitor, you need to assess, you need to monitor, and you need to adjust how you implement all the various aspects. What are the types of diseases that you're seeing showing up more now, and what can you do to try and prevent and minimize these occurrences? Because if they are climate related, then you now need to look towards your other sectors where the health system actually works in tandem with other sectors to see how we can put safeguards in place. You need to look at maybe your tourism sector. Do you have tourists coming at times of the year, peaking at times that you never used to have them coming before? So maybe you need to start sending out your public health officers. You need to send more of them out to the airport at different times of the year than maybe when you used to send them before. So it's a really very practical approach in terms of what happens on the ground, but your policies and procedures also need to take into account that it's not business as usual. Things are changing. The way in which we used to do things needs to be adjusted because there are factors at play that we don't necessarily have control over as a small island developing state. Climate change affects us far more severely than many other countries, certainly in more aggressive ways than it will affect persons who live on continents. That is our daily reality. And so we need to bear those things in mind.
All right. Before I hand back over to our moderator, I was asking the questions. I just wanted to ask a quick question though, Lori. We are a small country. Are we looking like we're creating this system, or is our response a little behind?
I think we are more reactive than proactive. We need to recognize that climate change is not just, remember that first graphic I had, human health, animal health, environmental health. When we talk about climate change, many persons think, oh, the environmental is making up noise again. It's really an environment issue. Human beings depend on their environment for their well-being. So that issue that environment has is going to affect us. If there's a negative thing happening in the environment, it is going to affect us as human beings. We need to be far more proactive, which is why this climate resilience is something that is really being pushed into sectoral plans. And each time we have management plans coming out, climate resilience is being quoted as a very big thing. The agricultural sector, food security, in water security, even in terms of electricity, the energy sector, climate resilience is really, really very important because we are going to end up losing a lot of the services that we take for granted if we don't start to put certain things in place. As I said, small island developing states, we suffer different from people on the continent, and it's disproportionate as well because our input into the environment that has resulted in the changes we're seeing in the climate today has been minimal. We are suffering because of what the larger countries have done, but we have to recognize that we have to put certain systems in place in order to safeguard ourselves for as long as we can until we hope that nature starts to find a balance and things start to level out.
Thank you, Lori.
Reversible loss.
Thank you, Cheryl. Thank you, Lori. I see Kimmery, your hand is up.
Yes, thank you. Good evening. Are you hearing me?
Yes, we're hearing you.
All right, wonderful. I told myself I was going to be a silent participant this afternoon, but it was so difficult because the presentations were really very informative. I have a question for Deborah and a comment regarding Lori's presentation. And my question, it might sound ridiculous, but it's based on an experience that I've had at two different ports of entry. One airport, one seaport. Now, there is a list that was described of items that are not permitted. Is it a different list for the airport versus the seaport, or is it just that the agents are not as vigilant as they need to be at all the ports? Do I wait for Deborah to respond before giving my comment, or do I make the comment?
Allow me to respond, then you give the comment, all right?
Sure.
Thank you so much for that question. First, I want you to understand that I am a public health nurse. I am not a custom officer. I am not part of immigration. However, we work hand in hand, and I'm privy to the information that has to do with items that they allow and those that they do not allow. I'm going to provide some answers to your question. Sometimes what you're coming in with can be allowed or disallowed based on the discretion of the officer you are interacting with. Some officers, when you get to them, and even if those items are on the prohibition list, if you provide some rationale or say, sir, I am not going to use this for this, I'm not going to plant this plant product, I'm not going to do anything otherwise, I'm just going to use it for soup or for XYZ reason. So he or she might use a discretion to say, all right, go ahead. And some, I don't want to sound judgmental, and I just want to answer from a neutral point of view. All right. And some might say, no, it is on the list and you cannot go in with this or go in with that. So sometimes their discretion affects what they allow or what they do not allow. And at other times, they are not even sure based on what you're bringing in. That item may not be the exact thing they have on the list. However, they might have something similar, and then they come to the conclusion that this cannot come in, and that is to be seized. All right. At other points, they will say, leave this item with us. We are going to find out from this agency and that agency and then get back to you. It happens. So I don't have all the information regarding all the items that are to be allowed and those that are not to be allowed. As I said, I am privy to the information because I work in the system here. So that is why I was able to get some things on the slide with also consultation to be able to provide some help with those two last slides. Please, can you go ahead with your observation, okay, or if you still have anything to say? Yeah.
No, that response was very useful, and it does have implications for public health, because, I mean, if we're saying we're not allowing certain items like meats for public health reasons, then your answer does provide some clarity on that. So thank you. And all right, thank you. Now, Laura's presentation, I must say it was very, very engaging. I'm the type of listener who, as I listen, I am creating the visuals in my mind. And as you spoke, I could see things like the crocodiles coming out of their water because the water is becoming too warm for them to live comfortably, and the type of risk that poses to the people on land and the other land animals. It was a very, very interesting presentation. The point that really stuck with me was when you spoke about pathogens and natural selection. And as much as we can think of those obvious things that are related to climate change, I never thought about that. And I'm thinking, well, the microbes are adapting. What are we, the higher species, doing? The microbes are adapting. How are we adapting? How are we changing our practices to make sure that in 100 years, in 1,000 years, it's not just the viruses and the other microbes are here, but we are here as well. So very interesting presentation. I thank you so much for it.
You're welcome, and thank you very much for the comment. Very often, I think it is lost on us that as we exploit our environment, we are actually being faced with things that we had never encountered before. So these animals are quite happy living where they are, and we say, okay, we're gonna go and tear down that section there to go and do a development. And these animals have existed with viruses and bacteria and fungi all this time. It doesn't really affect them. But suddenly we're exposed to something that this human population has never had the opportunity to be exposed to develop immunity to. And so by the time you look, again, natural selection, half the population is gone. Those that remain are those that have been able to weather it. But in as much as higher life forms adapt, so do lower life forms. And just because we can't see them doesn't mean they're not doing exactly what all living organisms do. And I dare say sometimes they're far better at it than we are. COVID-19 has done exactly that. The versions of the virus that killed their hosts didn't survive, because that doesn't make sense. You don't want to kill your host, you die as well. So those that make you sick, but you continue to live, those have stuck around and those persist. But of course, getting sick has implications for industry and commerce and family life and well-being. So as I said, health in the global system on planet Earth is really connected. Human health, animal health, and the environment. So thank you for that. I'm happy that you were able to make those connections through the presentation. I'm seeing a question from Cheryl. Oh,
There is a question from Andrea, but it's for public health nurse Udu. What is Udu? Do they take walkings for yellow fever at the comprehensive clinic? And what is this now? So do they take walkings for yellow fever at the comprehensive clinic? Also, are there any precautions for travel? Why is this not moving? Are there any precautions for travel? Why are honey and its products not allowed? So there are about 3 questions.
All right, thank you very much, Sandra. And for the person who asked the question, thank you. Taking walk-ins.
Just a moment. I see Mrs. McPherson's hand up. I don't know if she's clarifying the question.
I'm concluding on the question that you asked. I asked, it was to Spain, precautions to Spain. And that part was left off. Thank you. Precautions. Did you hear?
All right. Yes, I heard.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. At the Comprehensive Health Center, it depends. The vaccination days are Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays. However, if they have any remnants, because a vial of yellow fever vaccine can be used for 10 people. So if you come in at a point, you walk in at a point when they have remnants in the vial, then you can be vaccinated. The vaccine can only stay for 6 hours after constitution. It cannot be kept beyond that time. So if you walk in, instead of allowing wastage, they would accommodate you. For crowd control, and because sometimes they don't want to open one vial for just one client or 2 clients, it is only done on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays. And walk-ins are not usually accommodated. However, I said it depends. If you come in when a vial is open or in use, then you can be accommodated. And then for Spain, Spain is not on the list for yellow fever. It is not on the list for malaria fever. It is not any of the countries of interest where public health is concerned. We don't have any illness of significance from Spain at present. I'm not saying anything may not come up or cannot come up. However, at present, it is not a country of significance where public health is concerned. Which other question? Honey. Well, honey is a bee product and bee is an animal. So whichever disease or parasite is contained sometimes in the animal or plant can be transferred to the product. And honey is also in liquid form. It can easily spill, and when it spills, how it appears when it spills. So to avoid all those complications, I think that should be one of the reasons. In addition to the fact that it is a plant product that can harbor illness, parasites, or germs. I'm not sure if I provided help for your questions.
Yes, you did. Thank you. And I had one in the chat for Lori as well, just a quick ask.
Yes, you are asking how many people are ingesting water contaminated with fecal matter? 1.8 billion people globally.
Wow.
Yes,
Oh,
there
Lord.
are people who do not have access to clean drinking water. Many, many people. And I would say that this has probably increased because with the wars and the conflicts that have taken place recently and are ongoing, I'm sure that number is increasing.
Wow, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Are there any other questions for either presenters?
Well, do you mind? I have some questions since I'm with a group of nurses.
Go ahead, Lori.
Okay, well, I would like to know, based on the presentation here on climate change and infectious diseases, what are some of the things that you think that you can actually do to help increase the climate resilience of our healthcare system in your corner of the world, your neck of Jamaica, rather? And I'm just asking for the presentation because these things are really very important when we go to meetings and workshops. These are some of the ideas that we really do need to bring to implement in policies and management plans so that we can actually start to get real action on the ground.
All right, thank you, Lori. And I'll allow my colleagues to respond, especially those in clinical practice, whether in the chat or by raising their hands or opening their microphones and talking to you. But I'd have to say our secretary, Mrs. Sandra Chisholm Ford, made sure that when we were planning for this webinar series, she's very passionate about climate change and how it's impacting us. And so she wanted to have this presentation included. So I would say, for those of us who are educators, we're going to have to maybe dialogue more with you to include conversations or areas like this in our classes to facilitate educating our future nurses on what's happening and getting some of these same ideas on what we can do to have them ready for when they graduate going out into the areas of practice.
Thank you. Thanks for that.
Is there anyone else who would like to respond from clinical? I think more and more we are encountering topics in our profession that are current and that are affecting our practice. And so we have to be willing to, as Cheryl stated, to get the information, pass it on to those who are coming in so that we can all be abreast and we are aware of what is happening around us and how changes in our environment can impact the nursing care that we give. All right, and I'm seeing some messages. Okay, go ahead, Kimmery.
Right. I think as nurses, one of the frequent questions that we ask our patients is about garbage disposal. And we usually ask about it from the perspective of thinking of triggers for things like asthma. But if my understanding is correct, burning garbage is is one of or smoke pollutants from burning garbage is one of those things that is contributing to the depletion of the ozone and all of those things. So, oftentimes our patients aren't too concerned about those larger global things because they don't see how it affects them personally. So as clinicians, when we encounter patients who report to you that, I burn my rubbish or I practice slashing and burning to prepare my field, we talk to the farmer to say, Master Joe, yes, the slashing and burning might be quick and effective, but consider that the droughts are going to get longer because of some of these practices. So I think as frontline workers who are interacting with patients on a day-to-day basis, something as simple as how do you dispose your garbage can provide so much information for us to springboard into education about multiple areas, including how burning the garbage can affect climate change and affect their livelihood, their health, their children's health as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Kimmery. Sandro, Chisholm Ford, your time.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I want to tell Lori that I really appreciate this presentation. As Madam President said, I really wanted this topic to be a part of the presentations this time around because of the impact. As I'm a public health nurse, and I'm very aware that climate change is impacting healthcare, not just community health, but general health, as well as the areas that are affected as it relates to us achieving the sustainable development goals. So when I teach, first of all, before I go any further, Lori, I'm going to be inviting you to repeat this presentation as a lecture to my group. I'm going to see if I can arrange that. We'll talk off the air, but global warming and climate change, not just climate change, not global warming alone, climate change itself has been impacting our food reserves and our SDG as it relates to ending hunger is very much threatened, especially as it relates to the different climate activities that impacts our food, our farming, our forests, the drought, as it relates to our life below water. The fishes are moving to further away, deeper ocean because of the impact of climate change. So
days gone by when you could stand by the seashore and throw out a line and catch fishes. It is becoming even more challenging. So all of this is something that every single one of us need to look at, not just in our lives as nurses, in our personal lives, and see how we can actually help to mitigate the effects of climate change.
Thank you very much for that, Sandra. And yes, I would be willing to speak more about topics. Anything we can do to have the climate resilience conversation going, climate mitigation, climate adaptation, we need to advance those conversations.
Okay, I believe by now we would all see the importance of understanding the climate change and its importance on health. Do we have any, just going again, do we have any other comments or feedback for either presenters? Let me just see what is here. Okay. All right, so I'm not seeing anything else in the chat. Well, I see communication, which was being responded to. Let me see what's... Okay, great presentations. All right, so let me take this opportunity to say profound thanks to Mrs. Udo, and to Lori. What's Lori's last name? Harris. Miss Harris, for taking the time out to share with us. And indeed, they have been very interesting topics, current topics, topics that we have to really consider seriously in our profession as we go forward. We are persons who care for persons, and we are aware of the changes, whether it's environmental policy changes, any kind of change that is happening around us, global changes, how these changes affect our nursing practice. So we are aware that these changes that are happening around us do affect our nursing practice. And so we are making sure we equip ourselves with the knowledge to be able to better care for our clients and patients, and to deliver to our students as well, for those in nursing education. All right, any other comments before I hand over? I had my topic here for tomorrow, it disappeared. All right, so just to say thank you again to both presenters. I'll now hand over to Cheryl, our president.
All right. Thank you so much, Sandra. Thank you, colleagues. Let me just join Sandra in saying thank you for joining us. The only request I will have is tomorrow I'm going to volunteer some people because we need to have a little bit more interaction. You're too quiet. We don't want you to be logging in and not paying attention. We want you to be getting the information. And if you're shy, just type it in the chat. Thank you. So tomorrow we are going to be talking about common parasitic infections. Let's get a little bit more into it, because especially when I was growing up, I know our parents had to give us
deworming before back to school. I never saw any worm whatsoever, and I have not been a fan. But as we are hearing, yesterday we spoke about epidemiology and the pathogens and the things that are happening, and that things are coming to our shores because we heard about RSV and the fact that it is here. We are now testing and we're looking at how we're going to get the vaccine. And today we found out this is why we have Port Health, because it's very serious about what we may bring back or what persons will take here or what we bring somewhere else. And climate change is certainly impacting us. If we're losing our shorelines, if we're having issues with water, then certainly the parasitic infection will be something we want to hear about tomorrow. So just to close off as usual, again, if you haven't joined us for any of the 3 series, the people who have joined us should know the challenge at this point is for you to type your answers in the chat so that we have the one person who is going to get that prize. Andrea McPherson, we saw you. You're the only one who answered in the chat at the beginning and said you got 4 words out of infection prevention in that minute and a half. But now we're going to ask you, there are 4 questions, 2 from either presentation. We're asking you to put your answers in the chat, either on Zoom or YouTube, all at once. Do not type them singly. So I want you to get yourselves ready again to start typing. LaShawna won our prize yesterday. So these are the questions. The first one comes from the presentation on border control Port Health. First question, you may have to do a little bit of explaining as yesterday. What's the definition of Port Health? And please share 2 of the items that are prohibited from being brought in. The third question comes from Lorian's presentation. She said something is the biggest threat to health. And I'm asking, what was that? And then the last question, she also said that something is the driver of the climate change that we are having. What is the driver of climate change? So the 4 questions again, type your answers all at once. What's the definition of Port Health? Tell me 2 of the items that we're not allowed to bring into Jamaica. What is the single biggest health threat? And what's the main driver of the climate change that we are experiencing? Start typing.
I think you need to repeat that, Mrs. Garrix Lloyd.
I need to repeat the questions.
Yes.
What's the definition of Port Health? 2 of the
What is the single biggest health threat? And what's the main driver of climate change that we are experiencing? I just assume that people are typing and trying to make sure they put all the answers at once.
Alicia Vickers is first. I see here. Let me look. Making sure.
All right. Thank you, Alicia, for typing in first. But I'm almost sure that saltfish was included in the ones that we could bring in if it was under 20, what was it, kilograms or pounds? I'll ask Kimari to help me. She was paying close attention too. All right. Thank you, Alicia. Came in first. Let's see if there's anybody else. Those were the 4 questions.
We have a response from Andrea McPherson as well.
All right. International railroad crossings and waters and major seaports. All right. Meat and fish, climate change drivers are people. I see Sarah has also responded. All right. All right. So, Madam Chair, you help me. There are 3 people who have answered. I'm sure others are typing of those we have so far. Colleagues who are not typing anything, are you helping me to look? Lori's still here. Lori, how is this looking for the 2 from your presentation?
I'm a hard marker, you know. I think they've gotten half of the answer.
Okay.
The other half is not quite correct. They're in the right zone, but not fully correct.
All right. Says the teacher, that's a hard grader. All right, colleagues, anybody else? All right. So we're just waiting. If there's one more person, let me check over on YouTube and come back. YouTube has not responded just yet, but I would say, I believe our public health nurse, Madam Deborah, has left us. She's more than likely probably on duty. But I would dare to say at this point, based on the 3 answers we have, it appears that Andrea was before Sarah, so she may be closest. I'm just quickly double checking. Again, I'm sure saltfish was included in the ones that we could bring in. I know the slide that was brought up with what we're not allowed included the honey, the pork and its products, the meat and the lobster and the fish. But let us just double check on that. The saltfish, I'm going to guess because it's cured. But based on that, Laura says she's giving a half. So what I had was that climate change is the single biggest health threat that we are having based on the statement from WHO, and that the main driver of climate change are humans, but that's because we are burning things like fuels like the fossil fuels, the gas and the oil. Is that correct, Lori?
Right. So it's human activities, not just
all right, got it.
The activities and primarily the burning of fossil fuels. Yes.
Okay. All right. Colleagues, everybody on the same page with us? So I would say we thank you for answering. The point is you want to make sure you're taking something away. So come prepared every evening to answer a couple questions at the end. And I will ask Madam Moderator to just verify with me that we are saying that at this point, based on the answers that Lori gave. So nobody said human activities. They said humans and people. All right. And since Lori's here, we can decide to change the answer, right, Lori? So it would appear that we may not have a winner today, but we are happy for all the responses that we got. We want to make sure we're on the right side of what we're doing and what we are not doing, because we want to make sure we're keeping ourselves healthy. We want to lead by example. We want to make sure that we are protecting ourselves in and out of the country. And we want to ensure that we are doing what we can, because we need to ensure we are part of building that climate resilient health system. We have to also make sure we step up. Sometimes they like to relegate the nurses to the back and want to decide how it should go and then include us. I'm imploring us to please let us step up. We are getting the information. We are out there to be leaders and change agents as well, so that we can be a part of what we need. Because if you were listening, Lori says, in honesty, she thinks we are being reactive as opposed to proactive. So let us be a part of the proactivity. Yes, Sarah, you did say that, but you also said people. She's saying it's not just the people, it's the activities of the people. So that was the part that we needed. All right. So thank you, everybody. See you at 4:30 tomorrow when we're going to hear about common parasitic infections. Have a wonderful rest of your evening, and thank you for joining us. The only last thing I will say is, if you didn't hear it yesterday, we'll tell you tomorrow again when we are closing out just a little bit about our chapter and who we are. And if you have missed any of these presentations or you want to see what we've had before, please go to our YouTube channel, Omega Kappa Chapter. You can subscribe. It will notify you when we are live, because we usually try to live stream our educational sessions. And we also just leave them over there if you want to go back and see. So thank you very much, Laura, and thank you, Madam Sandra. Have a good afternoon, everybody. See you tomorrow.
Thank you. Have a good afternoon, everyone.